Thank you very much. I'm glad to be here. I want to thank Mark Pryor and Mike Ross for giving me a chance to come along for the ride. I want to thank our candidates for Attorney General and Land Commissioner Nate Steele and Mark Robertson for being here, and all the other candidates who are here. In 1986, when I was governor, we celebrated the 150th birthday of Arkansas. And we commissioned a contest to write the best song to capture it. The prize was won by an Arkansas native who was then a very successful Nashville songwriter named Waylon Holyfield. And he wrote, "Arkansas, you run deep in me." The first line is, "October morning in the Ozark Mountains." 41 years ago, on an October morning like this in the Ozark Mountains, I went to work there teaching at the University of Arkansas Law School. And those years were some of the happiest years Hillary and I ever had. I love living here. I love teaching here. I love being with the students. I did like the football games on Saturday afternoon. And I was here when we didn't have great basketball teams and before the great dynasty started, and I still like going to the game. And they let a bunch of young lawyers and hangers-on like me play in a pickup game in the university gym several times a week. I was big enough to block. That's about all I was good at. But here's what I want to say to you. So I get here last night, late. We were yesterday with Governor Beebe, and we went to Conway and to Jonesboro, and then we went up to Paragould, and then we went over to Hoxie to a county Democratic dinner. I hadn't been there in forever and a day, and I had the best time. But anyway, I got here late last night, and I flipped on the television. And the first thing I saw was one of those negative ads that these out-of-staters were running against Mark Pryor, in which they claimed that he had declined to debate his opponent about such grievous national security matters as ISIS. So the first thing I said to Mark is, I said, now that can't be true. And then in the ad, they had some phony committee name on the ad. And I said, what's the truth? He said, the truth is we're having two televised debates. One covers national security, and the other covers domestic issues. And I agreed to him before he did. But those people don't care, because how would you know that if I hadn't just told you? So they just run an ad, just whatever it said. Now, here's what I want to tell you. The people that paid for those ads, they will not give a rip about you the day after the election. They are trying to create an environment in this state of resentment. Vote for what you're against. They see the surveys, the president and administration are not popular, so they say, you got one more chance to cast a protest, baby, put it in there. It's a pretty good scam. His opponent wants you to give him a 6-year job to cast a protest that will be invalid in 2 years, because the president's just got 2 more years to serve. And his opponent wants you to give him a 4-year job to cast a 2-year protest, and a job that doesn't have much to do with what goes on in Washington, D.C. And both of these gentlemen are fortunate in the sense that they and their opponents have both served in Congress. So here's what I want to tell you. There was a story in one of the blog sites the other day. I think it was the Daily Beast. And it was highlighted, Bubba goes back to the Briar Patch. Clinton's Arkansas obsession. Well, I am obsessed. I get guilty. I love this place. If it hadn't been for me coming here to Fayetteville more than 4 decades ago, I never would have become governor. I never would have become president. Nothing else would have happened. And I got up this morning and called a couple of my old friends, just 3 people, just to hear their voices up here. I am obsessed. But I did not come back to the Briar Patch. I came back to the future. You are the future of this state. And the most important thing I can tell you is all these polls, the ones that show our guys ahead and the ones that show them behind, they're all right. Doesn't make sense? Oh, yes, it does. Anybody can do a poll now. We could poll everybody in this crowd. And all we'd have to do is report the results. The question is, does this crowd reflect who's going to vote on Election Day? The polls that show us in trouble uniformly believe that younger voters who vote for president will not show up in a midterm. And that's why we wound up having all this political paralysis, because an unrepresentative group of Americans vote. You got more at stake in this election than people like me. I have more yesterdays than tomorrows. You've got more tomorrows than yesterdays, and you better show up and protect your tomorrow. And look, they've already said most of what needs to be said, but I want to say something else. My life now, you know, is, besides being a newly minted grandfather, and having to occasionally remind grandmother that it's not our child. You know, we got to show up when we're invited and not too much else. She is beautiful, though, our little girl. Anyway, it's my foundation. I do work, you know, and I work with Democrats and Republicans and independents. I work with people all over the world. We work in Africa. We work in Asia, from India to Indonesia and all of Southeast Asia. We work in Australia. We work in Ukraine, where we have been going through all this terrible trouble with running the AIDS program there. Our top 4 people stayed behind in Liberia when the Ebola outbreak broke out to help them organize a response, and thank goodness they're still healthy. We work in Latin America and the Caribbean, and we do a lot of work in America. Here's what I know. Every place in the world where people practice cooperation, good things are happening. Where they're in constant conflict, bad-mouthing each other, good things don't happen. Everywhere in the world where government works with non-governmental groups in the private sector, good things are happening. Everywhere in the world there's estrangement and you don't have inclusive government that brings in everybody, good things are not happening. That's the decision you got to make today. Because all 4 of these people have been in Congress. You actually know what they'll do. Mark Pryor and Mike Ross have proved under Republican and Democratic presidents that they will listen to everybody, work with everybody, be open to everybody. Their opponents have proven under Democratic and Republican presidents that they are nowhere near there. Every year, the Congress has this, there's a group in Washington that rates the members of the House and Senate, kind of from 1 to 100 in the Senate, on how partisan they are. Are you way to the right or way to the left? Mark Pryor scored 49 or 50 every year because he listens to everybody and works with everybody. And his opponent thinks that's weakness. He thought he was really being tough when he was the only member of the Arkansas congressional delegation to vote against the Farm Bill. I mean, after all, it's just 36% of our economy. That's why you've got a great agriculture school here. And he said, I did it because they wouldn't take out the food stamps. Well, food stamps buy food grown by Arkansas farmers. And the reason that more of them were bought is that the economy was in a tank and working people could not afford to feed their kids. And now it's going down naturally because the economy's coming back. So you got my way or the highway. When Mike Ross was in the House, without regard to who was in the White House, he was a member of something called the Blue Dog Caucus of Democrats who used to get criticized because they kept trying to find a way for the Republicans to work with them to actually get something done. If you go back and read the history of the U.S. Constitution, the framers intended for people to have arguments. They wanted people with strong convictions elected to the Congress, but they set the system up So they'd have to finally get together and get something done and get the show on the road. The Constitution could be subtitled, "Let's Make a Deal." So Mike Beebe now has the highest approval rating of any governor in the United States because that's the way he's run the governor's office. That's the way Mark Pryor's run his Senate office. That's the kind of congressman Mike Ross was, and that's why Mike Ross should be senator and Mark Pryor should be reelected. I mean, Mike Ross should be governor and Mark Pryor should be reelected to the Senate. Because if you don't have an inclusive philosophy, if it's my way or the highway, there is no way in the wide world you're ever going to get anything done. Let me tell you something. I don't expect it to get our side any votes now, but this economy is coming back. People just don't feel it yet. But we had a horrible financial crisis in 2008. In the last 150 years, in the United States, there have been 4 financial crashes. And all over the world, there have been several. Every place there's been one, it's taken on average 10 years to get over. We got over ours in 6. 4 years ahead of schedule. Now, why? Well, America's created 10 million jobs, more than Europe and Japan combined, even though there's a lot more of them than us. Now, most people don't feel it yet, so they're not going to vote on it because they're still having trouble. Why? Because we don't have broad-based prosperity, and we haven't had since the day I left. That's the truth. Median income, the incomes in the middle, adjusted for inflation, are lower today than they were the day I left office. That's our challenge. That's why the minimum wage vote's important. That's why equal pay for women is important. That's why Mike Ross's proposal to increase the quality of technical training in Arkansas is important. That's why giving more relief on the student loan front so nobody drops out of college because they think they can't pay their bills is important. But we are coming back. The question is, are we going to come back together? That is the big question in Arkansas. It is the big question in America. Can we have broad-based prosperity again? You know, when I was president, I looked at the difference in the recovery under me and the recovery when President Reagan was in office. He actually did better than me for one group of people. The top 20%'s incomes increased 22% under President Reagan and only increased 20.5% under me. But the bottom 20%, they increased less than 1% under Reagan and 23% under me. And everybody in the middle, the 60% in the middle, they all did between 25 and 50% better when I was there. Why? Because we worked at it, because that's what we believe in. Because if we can't go forward together, we can never be what we ought to be, and we can't guarantee you the future you deserve to have. That's what this whole thing's about. But let me get back to what I really wanted to tell you. The reason this keeps happening is that you don't show up at midterms. We get this hugely representative group of people who vote in presidential elections. Everybody gets it. Then they get around and say, well, why can't the president fix everything? Oh, I forgot to vote at midterms. So that's all the Congress, all the House of Representatives, a third of the Senate, most of the governors, and most of the state legislatures. We have to work together. We have to work together. I'm telling you, we are better positioned for the future than any country. Will we have challenges? Yes. Do we have to meet them? Yes. Will there ever be a time in the future of the world when people have no problems? No. But at least we ought to have a new set of challenges, and we ought to be working on the right model, which is shared prosperity, shared opportunity, shared responsibilities. That is what this is about. So, and that's why I feel so strongly about it. We know better than to let a bunch of people who don't give a rip about us come in here and run all these ads slamming our officials. These ads, they make old Mark Pryor sound like he is leading a communist revolution up there in Washington. But the facts show that unlike almost every other Democrat and Republican, he's been right there in the middle, willing to work for everybody and work with everybody. So I'm just telling you, this is all about whether you show up and whether you can get other people to show up and whether finally we can convince our people that these elections that occur when there's no candidate for president on the ballot are every bit as important to your future as the elections when there is a presidential candidate on the ballot. Will you help us do that? Now, Mark Pryor didn't say, because he probably didn't want to embarrass him, that he also has 2 children in school here, and they're helping first the registration, which finished yesterday, and then there are going to be buses driving through this campus when the early voting starts to make it just as easy as possible for people to get on the bus and go vote early. And more important than any poll you read will be, you ought to follow it starting on the 20th, the numbers of people who are voting early in places like Fayetteville. Now, I will say again, we've got a bright future. We're the #1 oil and gas producing country in the world now. We got a 100-year supply of natural gas. We have tripled the number of people getting electricity from the wind, increased the number of people getting electricity from the sun by 10-fold. Texas, the oil capital of America, now generates on a good day 25% of its electricity from the wind. We can create millions of jobs, making our businesses more energy efficient, our factories more energy efficient, millions of jobs. We've got the best university network in the world. We've got all these research centers, but I'm just telling you, the biggest threat we have is political dysfunction. Why do these people want to spend $20 million in out-of-state money running negative ads against Mark Pryor? Because they don't want anybody who will work with everybody. They're not interested in listening to everybody. They want what they want, when they want it, more for people who already have plenty. And he wants to create a society where everybody's got a fair chance. Why are all these people trying to get you to cast resentment votes and vote for what you're against? You're too young. You should be voting for what you're for. You should be voting for what you want. You should be voting for your dreams. I got to live my dreams. And I had 6 jobs in law school. I had a job in college. I had loans. When I was working over there, I still owed my student loans. And I was making, as I remember, about $16,000 a year. And I never missed a payment. But because I was teaching in a public institution of higher education, I got some credit for the time I spent teaching. So I made the payments, and I also taught off some of the debt. Why? Because the governing idea, and by the way, that bill then passed with Republicans and Democrats. We didn't have this partisan divide as bad as it is now, because we thought we'd all be better off if we worked together. We thought everybody had a stake in everybody else's development. You know, there are now 230,000 people in Arkansas who spent some time in an institution of higher education in this state and didn't get their degree. And a lot of them didn't get it because they could not afford to stay in, and they thought they would never be able to pay their debt back. We know what these guys will do on the student loan issue, and we know what their opponents will do. This is not a closed question for what is better for the future of the state of Arkansas. So, I remember once a friend of mine who was then 75 was going to, said to me, I ran into him at the Little Rock Airport one day when I was governor, and he was there to meet one of his siblings because they had just lost their sister. And he put his hand on my shoulder and he said, Bill, It doesn't take long to live a life. I remember going to work over there like it was yesterday. I remember the first time another teacher here, a young woman on the faculty, came into my office because she'd been involved in a car accident, and she said, "I don't have any money, and you got a salary. Will you represent me for nothing?" I didn't even know her, and I did it. And we won. But that's what makes life worth living. All these stories, all these friendships, all these ties. If you believe what we have in common is more important than our interesting differences, you got to vote for Pryor and Ross. If you believe that this education of yours is not only your God-given right, but the ticket to live your dreams and write your future, you got to want it for everybody else who's willing to work hard like you are. And it really bothers me that all this big anonymous money, ever since the Supreme Court tried to hang a for sale sign on America with the Citizens United decision, that all this big anonymous money is out there just churning out these negative ads, trying to get you to vote against something you are too young to vote against. You are too young to be sucker punched into a protest vote that doesn't amount to a hill of beans. You need to vote for what you are for. And I'll just give you one last example. Arkansas ranks number 1 in America in the percentage of people who have now got health insurance who didn't have it before. Number 1. Now, ranks number 1 because a Democratic governor worked with a Republican legislature to get 75% of both houses to vote to participate in that private option plan. Now, what their opponents are offering, you can also see. In Louisiana, the Republican governor, Republican legislature said, "Oh, we're not going to fool with that. That's that evil, demonic stuff coming out of Washington." Now, here's how what happens to a few affects what happens to the many. Yeah, you got 200,000 more people with health insurance, and they're all working people, by the way, with kids. Blue Cross just announced, and others did, that the estimated health insurance premiums in Arkansas, the price next year will go down 2%. Down. The same companies writing insurance in Louisiana have asked for an 18.5% increase. So that affects everybody, not just the people who didn't have health insurance. Why? Because they didn't participate in this bad old program, so people are still showing up at their hospitals without insurance, and nobody's going to let them die, so they take care of them, and they pass the cost on to everybody else. We've had the lowest inflation in health care costs in 50 years. And Arkansas is getting the benefit of it because you had leadership that worked with everybody to get something done good that was good for everybody. And the same thing will happen with student loans. The same thing will happen with improving the preparation of our workforce for the 21st century. The same thing will happen if Governor Ross can pass his plan for universal preschool education, which his opponent says we can't afford. The same thing will happen if you send a thunderous message to Washington, D.C. by saying, "We heard all that stuff about Mark Pryor. We know him. We knew his daddy. We know their family. This is Arkansas. Thank you very much. Take your canned ads and go somewhere else." But we're done here. You got the show. You have to stand and deliver. Early voting, election day. If you do it, you'll be proud you did. I know these people. I am obsessed with Arkansas. You gave me the whole life I've had since then. You think about it. There are millions of people alive today around the world just on the AIDS medicine we negotiated the cheapest prices in the world for. That would have never happened if I hadn't had a chance to live here and work here and do what happened here in my life. Everything. I know what works. what works is when we do it together. Mark Pryor and Mike Ross, they're together politicians. We're not on our own. We're all in this together. We're going to share the future. We might as well make it a great one. Thank you, and God bless you.